Imagine standing in a room filled with the people who should love you most, only to feel the sting of their betrayal cut deeper than any battlefield wound. For Captain Juniper Hale, a 33-year-old Army Ranger hardened by missions in shadowed corners of the globe, this wasn't just a moment, it was a declaration of war. In a Montana lodge, surrounded by snow-dusted pines and the crackle of a Thanksgiving fire, her family didn't just turn their backs, they aimed to erase her. Her sister, Penelope, with her calculated charm, and her husband Gideon Wells, a man dripping with inherited wealth, orchestrated a cold dismissal. They left Juniper with nothing but the keys to a rusted 1979 Chevy pickup, thrown at her feet with a sneer. "Broken soldier, crawl back to your barracks." That moment, raw and jagged, wasn't just a family spat. It was the spark of a fight that would unravel secrets and shake an empire. Stick with us as Juniper's story unfolds, a tale of honor forged in fire. Like, comment, share, and subscribe to join this journey of truth and redemption. The lodge was a cathedral of polished pine and antler chandeliers, nestled in Montana's Bitterroot Valley. Snow fell softly outside, blanketing the rugged peaks in a hush that should have promised peace. It was Thanksgiving weekend, a time for gratitude, for family. Instead, the air inside was thick with tension, sharp as a blade. Juniper sat in a high-backed leather chair, her posture rigid, a remnant of military discipline that clung to her like a second skin. Across from her, her family formed a wall of silent judgment. Penelope, her older sister, adjusted her cashmere shawl, her smile a practiced veneer of elegance hiding something predatory. Gideon, in a tailored blazer, toyed with a gold cufflink, his eyes glinting with smug certainty. Their father, Clarence Hale, a real estate mogul, flipped through a financial report, his disinterest a deliberate weapon. No one spoke, but their collective gaze screamed, "You are nothing here." The family lawyer, Vernon Tate, a man with deep-set eyes and a nervous tic, stood at the head of the room, clutching the will of General Amos Hale, Juniper's grandfather, the only person who ever saw her for who she was. His voice cracked as he read, "To my granddaughter, Captain Juniper Hale, I bequeath my 1979 Chevrolet Silverado, currently in the barn." The words landed like a grenade, the silence that followed deafening. Penelope's lips twitched, barely hiding her triumph. Gideon stood, snatching the tarnished keys from the desk and tossing them with deliberate malice. They skittered across the hardwood, stopping at Juniper's boots. "Broken soldier," he spat loud enough for all to hear. "Crawl back to your barracks. You're done here." The room held its breath, waiting for her to crack. Juniper didn't flinch. Years of facing death in deserts and jungles had taught her to bury pain deep. She bent slowly, her movements precise, and picked up the keys. Her hand was steady, her face a mask of calm, but inside, her heart pounded like a war drum. She met Gideon's gaze, her eyes cold and unyielding, the same stare that had silenced enemies in far-off lands. "Understood," she said, her voice low, lethal in its restraint. She turned, her boots echoing on the floor, and walked out into the snow. The lodge door closed behind her, but it wasn't the end. It was the opening shot of a battle she hadn't chosen but wouldn't lose. Outside, the Montana cold bit at her skin, but it was nothing compared to the chill of betrayal. She climbed into the Chevy's cab, the cracked vinyl seat creaking under her weight. The air smelled of dust and faded dreams, a faint trace of her grandfather's pipe tobacco lingering. The keys felt heavy, not just metal but a weight of history. Juniper's mind flashed to her childhood, to nights when Clarence mocked her love for climbing trees, calling it unladylike, while Penelope was groomed for boardrooms. Only Amos, with his general's gravitas, had seen her strength, teaching her to fish in icy streams and whispering tales of honor under starlit skies. Now, they tried to reduce his legacy to a rusted truck. But Juniper sensed something more, a secret hidden in this dismissal, a thread she'd pull until their empire unraveled. As the snow thickened, she gripped the wheel, her resolve hardening. This wasn't over. It was just beginning. The Montana night wrapped around Juniper Hale like a shroud. The old Chevy's cab her only refuge from the sting of her family's betrayal. The keys, tossed at her feet by Gideon Wells with a sneer, weren't just metal. They were a challenge, a gauntlet thrown by a family that saw her as a failure. But as she sat in the truck, the faint scent of her grandfather Amos Hale's pipe tobacco stirred memories that burned brighter than the lodge's fire. General Amos, the one soul who saw her fire, had left her this truck for a reason. His words, spoken in a hospital room years ago, echoed now. "Honor is your shield, Juniper. Let no one steal it." That promise, etched in her soul, became her anchor as she faced the wreckage of her family's dismissal. This wasn't just a truck, it was a lifeline, a whisper from Amos that she wasn't alone. Juniper's fingers traced the worn steering wheel, the cold biting through her calloused hands. The barn's shadows loomed outside, the wind howling like a distant warning. She closed her eyes, and the past flooded in. At 16, she'd sat at the Hale family's polished oak table, Clarence's voice cutting through the clink of silverware. "Juniper, stop chasing boyish dreams. You're embarrassing us." Penelope, always the golden child, soaked up his praise, her law school ambitions a crown he polished. Juniper, with her love for strategy games and wilderness treks, was a blemish on their legacy. Her mother, Loretta, would deflect with a nervous smile, passing the potatoes, her silence a quiet agreement. Only Amos, with his weathered hands and piercing gaze, stood firm. At a Christmas dinner, when Clarence mocked her with a gift of pink hiking boots, "Maybe these'll make you less of a tomboy," Amos had pulled her aside. "You're a warrior, Juniper," he'd said, pressing a worn copy of The Art of War into her hands. "Build your own path." That book, now tucked in her rucksack, was her creed. In the hospital months before his death, Amos had gripped her hand, his voice a rasp. "They'll try to break you, but your honor is a fortress. Promise me you'll hold it." She'd promised, tears burning her eyes, and now in the Chevy's dim interior, that vow was her North Star. The family's betrayal wasn't new. It was a war she'd fought since childhood. Clarence's disdain, Penelope's smug superiority, Loretta's complicity. They'd built a world where Juniper was an outsider. But Amos had seen her, trained her to endure, to fight. The truck wasn't a dismissal. It was his final gift, a puzzle she was meant to solve. Her breath fogged in the cold, each exhale a reminder of battles fought in places most maps ignored. Afghan deserts, Somali outposts. She'd faced ambushes, carried wounded soldiers through fire, earned her ranger tab through 62 days of hell. Yet here, in her family's lodge, the wounds cut deeper. Gideon's words, "broken soldier," echoed her father's old taunts, but they didn't break her. They fueled her. She turned the key, the engine coughing to life, a low rumble that felt like Amos's voice urging her forward. The truck's headlights cut through the snow, illuminating a path out of the barn. She didn't know what lay ahead, but she sensed a secret buried in this old Chevy, a truth her family feared. As she drove toward a rented cabin in the Bitterroot foothills, the snow thickened, obscuring the road like the lies her family wove. Juniper's mind sharpened, her ranger instincts kicking in. The truck's glove compartment rattled faintly, a sound out of place. She pulled over, the night silent but for the crunch of snow under her boots. Her fingers, steady from years of handling rifles, popped the compartment open. Inside, beneath a faded map, was a small black case, its surface scuffed but deliberate. Her pulse quickened. This wasn't random. Amos had hidden something here, something her family didn't want her to find. The case was locked, but its weight promised answers. She clutched it, her resolve steeling. This was no longer about inheritance. It was about uncovering a truth that could bring down an empire. The Montana night was a living thing, its icy breath seeping into the cab of the 1979 Chevy Silverado as Captain Juniper Hale gripped the mysterious black case she'd found in the glove compartment. The weight of it, small but deliberate, felt like a grenade in her hands, loaded with potential to blow apart her family's betrayal. Her grandfather, General Amos Hale, hadn't left her this truck as a cruel joke. It was a lifeline, a coded message from beyond the grave. The lodge's polished cruelty, Penelope's smug smile, Gideon's venomous taunt, "broken soldier," still burned in her chest, but the case promised something more, a secret her family feared. As snow swirled outside, obscuring the Bitterroot Valley's jagged peaks, Juniper's ranger instincts kicked in. This was no longer just a family feud. It was a mission, and the Chevy held the first clue to unraveling a conspiracy that could shake her family's empire to its core. Juniper drove the winding road to her rented cabin, a ramshackle hideout nestled among pines, its flickering porch light barely cutting through the storm. The case sat on the passenger seat, its presence a constant pull, like a beacon in a firefight. She parked, the Chevy's engine ticking as it cooled, and carried the case inside, her boots leaving wet tracks on the warped floorboards. The cabin smelled of damp wood and solitude, a stark contrast to the lodge's opulence. She set the case on a rickety table, her heart pounding, not from fear, but from the thrill of discovery. Her training had taught her to trust her instincts, and every fiber screamed that this was Amos's final stand, a puzzle only she could solve. She examined the case under the dim glow of a single bulb. It was locked, no keyhole, just a smooth surface with a faint ridge. A biometric lock, maybe? Her grandfather had always been meticulous, a strategist who planned 3 moves ahead. She pressed her thumb to the ridge, half expecting nothing. A soft click echoed in the quiet cabin, and the case popped open. Inside was a USB drive, its surface scratched but intact, nestled in foam like a relic. Her pulse quickened. This was no accident. Amos had hidden this for her, knowing she'd find it, knowing she'd fight. She plugged it into her encrypted laptop, her fingers steady despite the adrenaline surging through her veins. The screen flickered, revealing a single audio file labeled Directive_01. She hit play. Amos's voice, frail but laced with iron resolve, filled the cabin. This isn't what I signed, Vernon. I won't let them rewrite my legacy. The recording cut off abruptly, a shard of truth jagged enough to draw blood. Juniper's breath caught. Vernon Tate, the family lawyer, had been in on it, whatever it was. The will read at the lodge, giving everything to Penelope and Gideon, was a lie. Amos had been coerced. His wishes twisted in his final days. The USB was the first piece of evidence, a spark that could ignite a firestorm. But it wasn't enough. She needed more, documents, witnesses, something to turn this fragment into a weapon. Her mind raced, mapping the battlefield. Penelope and Gideon's smug confidence at the lodge, Clarence's cold indifference. They thought they'd buried her with that truck. But Amos had known better. He'd armed her with this clue, trusting her to uncover the truth. The USB hinted at a larger scheme. Maybe a forged will, maybe something darker. Juniper's eyes flicked to the window, where the snow fell heavier, isolating her in this fight. But isolation was her strength. She'd survived ambushes in places where hope was a luxury, and this was no different. The Chevy wasn't just a vehicle. It was a vault, and this USB was the first key. She needed an ally, someone who could crack the digital code and trace the threads of her family's deceit. As she secured the USB in a hidden pocket of her rucksack, a faint noise outside, a twig snapping under the snow, sent her instincts into overdrive. She killed the light, her hand instinctively reaching for the knife strapped to her ankle. The cabin was remote, but not remote enough. Had someone followed her from the lodge? Was Gideon's cruelty more than just words? The night held its breath, and so did she, listening for the next sound. This wasn't just about the will anymore. It was about survival, and Juniper Hale was no stranger to that fight. The USB was her first weapon, but the war was just beginning. The Montana snow fell like a curtain, sealing Captain Juniper Hale in her cabin with the weight of a secret that could topple her family's empire. The USB drive, hidden in her rucksack, held her grandfather Amos's voice, a defiant fragment proving the will was a lie. But alone in the Bitterroot Valley, with the faint snap of a twig still echoing in her ears, Juniper knew she couldn't fight this war solo. Her family, Penelope, Gideon, Clarence, thought they'd crushed her with a rusted Chevy and a cruel dismissal. They didn't know she was a ranger, trained to turn setbacks into strategy. The USB was her first weapon, but she needed an ally, someone who'd run toward danger with her. In the quiet of the cabin, with the wind howling like a warning, she scrolled her phone and found the name, Elias Boone. A brother-in-arms, a man who'd saved her life in a dusty Afghan valley. His voice, steady as ever, was about to light a spark in this dark fight. Juniper hesitated, her thumb hovering over the call button. It had been 2 years since she'd last spoken to Elias, now running a cybersecurity startup in Boise. Life had pulled them apart, but bonds forged in combat don't break. She hit call, the ring cutting through the cabin's silence. Elias answered on the second ring, his voice warm but sharp with respect. "Captain Hale," he said, not Juniper, a nod to their shared past. She laid out the situation like a mission brief. The forged will, the USB's audio, Gideon's taunt, broken soldier, and the sense that her family's betrayal hid something bigger. She didn't need to explain the hurt. Elias heard it in her pauses. Before she could ask for help, he cut in, "Send me the files." Secure line. "I'm in." His tone was unwavering, like the day he'd dragged her from a hail of bullets in the Karengal Valley. "No charge, Juniper," he added, softer now. "You took a round for my squad back there. This isn't a favor. It's what we do." She could almost hear the grin in his voice as he added, "Besides, I can't stand rich punks who think they own the world. A warmth spread through her chest, thawing the chill of betrayal. Elias wasn't just an ally. He was family, the kind that runs toward the fire, not away. She sent the USB's audio file through an encrypted channel, her fingers steady despite the adrenaline. The cabin's walls creaked, the storm outside growing fiercer, and she couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Was it paranoia, or had Gideon sent someone to ensure her silence? The USB was a ticking bomb, and she was its detonator. Elias called back within hours, his voice tight with urgency. Juniper, that audio's legit, but it's only a piece. There's metadata on the file. Timestamps showing it was recorded 3 days before Amos died. And get this, there's a shadow file, partially corrupted, mentioning Silverpoint Ventures. I dug into it. It's a shell company, and the trail leads to a consulting firm owned by your sister, Penelope. Juniper's breath caught. Penelope, with her polished smiles and ruthless ambition, was the architect of this fraud. Silverpoint wasn't just a company. It was a mask, hiding dirty money and dirtier secrets. Elias's words were a lifeline, pulling her from isolation into a fight she could win. I'm running a deeper trace, he said. This goes high. Stay sharp, Captain. Juniper paced the cabin, the USB's weight heavier now. Elias's findings confirmed her suspicions. The will wasn't just altered, it was a calculated heist. But a single audio clip wasn't enough to bring down Penelope's empire. She needed hard proof, documents, emails, something to nail the coffin shut. Her eyes flicked to the window, where the snow obscured everything beyond the glass. That twig snap. Had it been a deer, or something more sinister? Her ranger training screamed caution. She checked the cabin's locks, her knife still strapped to her ankle. Elias was her anchor, but the battlefield was here, in Montana, where her family's wealth and power loomed like the mountains outside. The USB was the key, but the lock was still out there, hidden in Penelope's world of lies. As she waited for Elias's next report, a low rumble echoed outside. Not thunder, but an engine, idling too close. Someone was out there, and they weren't here for Thanksgiving leftovers. The Montana storm raged outside Captain Juniper Hale's cabin, the wind howling like a warning as she clutched the USB drive, its audio file a damning shard of truth. Her grandfather Amos's voice, defiant against a forged will, was her first weapon, and Elias Boone's discovery of Penelope's shell company, Silverpoint Ventures, had sharpened her resolve. But the low rumble of an engine idling too close in the snow-choked night snapped her senses to high alert. Someone was watching. Maybe Gideon, maybe a hired shadow sent to silence her. Juniper's ranger training kicked in, her pulse steady despite the danger. The USB was a spark, but she needed a blaze to burn down her family's lies. Penelope's iPad, always glued to her side, was the next target, a vault of secrets in plain sight. Under the cover of the storm, Juniper planned a covert mission to the Hale estate. A high-stakes raid to uncover the proof that could end this war. The night was her ally, but one wrong move could turn her into prey. Juniper slipped into black tactical gear, her movements silent and precise, honed by years of navigating hostile terrain. The estate, a sprawling fortress of stone and glass nestled in the Bitterroot Valley, was only 10 miles away, but it might as well have been a war zone. She checked her knife, strapped to her ankle, and tucked the USB into a hidden pocket. The engine outside had gone quiet, but the unease lingered. Was it a neighbor, or had Penelope sensed the noose tightening? Juniper killed the cabin's lights, her eyes adjusting to the dark as she slipped out the back, the snow muffling her steps. The Chevy stayed behind. Too loud, too traceable. She moved on foot, a ghost in the blizzard, her breath fogging in the freezing air. The estate loomed through the storm, its windows glowing like eyes. Juniper knew its layout like a battlefield map, every door, every blind spot, from childhood games turned tactical memory. The security system was laughable, a cheap commercial setup meant for vandals, not a ranger. She bypassed the alarm with a flick of her multi-tool, the click lost in the wind's roar. Inside, the house was silent, its opulence oppressive. Marble floors, elk antler chandeliers, the faint scent of Penelope's lavender perfume. Juniper's boots made no sound as she moved to the study, where Penelope's iPad charged on a mahogany desk, its screen a faint glow in the dark. Her sister's arrogance was her weakness. Juniper guessed the password on the first try. The birthday of a senator's son Penelope was cozying up to. Predictable. She plugged in a clone drive, initiating a full data transfer. The progress bar crawled, each second a lifetime. Her ears strained for any sound, a creak, a footstep. The storm outside was her shield, but if Gideon or Penelope woke, she'd be trapped. Her mind flashed to Afghanistan, to nights spent in ambush positions, waiting for the enemy to move. This was no different. The transfer completed, and she unplugged the drive, slipping it into her gear. As she turned to leave, a shadow moved in the hallway, a silhouette against the dim light. Her heart stopped. Someone was awake. She pressed herself into the study's corner, knife in hand, as footsteps approached. Was it a servant, or had Gideon's cruelty turned active? The shadow paused, then moved on, a door clicking shut upstairs. Juniper exhaled, melting back into the storm, leaving no trace. Back in the cabin, her hands still steady from adrenaline, Juniper plugged the clone drive into her laptop. Elias was already waiting on a secure video call, his face grim but focused. "You're insane, Captain," he said, half-laughing, "but let's see what you got." They sifted through the data, emails, receipts, gala invites, until a folder labeled Legacy Plan stopped them cold. Inside was a draft will, time-stamped 2 days before Amos's death, when he was sedated and dying. Next to it, a voicemail from Vernon Tate, the family lawyer, his voice shaking. "Penelope, this is wrong. If Clarence finds out, we're done. This will's a fake." Juniper's blood ran cold. This was the smoking gun, proof of a conspiracy. But as Elias flagged a hidden file, an encrypted transfer to Silver Point Ventures, the cabin's power flickered. Outside, headlights cut through the snow. Someone had followed her. The raid had won her a weapon, but the enemy was closing in. The Montana dawn broke cold and gray, but inside Captain Juniper Hale's cabin, a fire burned. The cloned iPad drive, snatched in her daring night raid on the Hale estate, held a draft will and a panicked voicemail from Vernon Tate, proof that her sister Penelope and brother-in-law Gideon had forged their grandfather Amos's legacy. With Elias Boone's cybersecurity skills unearthing ties to Penelope's shell company, Silver Point Ventures, Juniper had a smoking gun. But a single bullet wouldn't win this war. Her family's empire, built on Clarence's wealth and Penelope's ruthlessness, loomed like the Bitterroot Peaks. The headlights that pierced the storm last night hinted at danger closing in. Maybe a hired thug sent to silence her. Juniper needed a battlefield where truth could outshine money, and she found it in a Missoula courtroom. With a fierce lawyer by her side, she was ready to face her family and expose their lies, but the stakes were higher than ever. One misstep could bury her for good. Juniper sat beside Nora Caldwell, a young Missoula attorney with a reputation for taking down giants. Nora's office, a cluttered space above a coffee shop, smelled of espresso and determination, a far cry from the marble halls of Penelope's legal team. Juniper had briefed her like a mission commander. The USB audio of Amos resisting the will's change, the cloned iPad's forged draft, Vernon's trembling voicemail, and Silverpoint's dirty money trail. Nora's eyes gleamed with righteous fury. "This isn't just fraud, Juniper," she'd said. "It's a conspiracy to steal your grandfather's honor." Now, in the courtroom's heavy silence, Juniper's posture was ramrod straight. Her ranger discipline a shield against the stares of Penelope, Gideon, and Clarence across the aisle. The air carried the scent of old wood and tension, every creak a reminder of the battle about to unfold. Penelope sat in a sleek gray suit, whispering to her lawyer, Roland Pierce, a silver-haired shark known for shredding witnesses. Gideon fidgeted, his confidence fraying, while Clarence stared ahead, his face a mask of corporate ice. Pierce opened with a venomous salvo, painting Juniper as a bitter veteran, unhinged by war, lashing out in jealousy over Penelope's success. "Post-traumatic stress," he sneered, "makes her unreliable, Your Honor." Juniper's face remained stone, her heart steady. She'd faced worse than words in Kandahar's dust. Then Nora stood, her presence a quiet storm. "Your Honor," she said, her voice clear as a bell, "we're here to expose a fraud that defiled General Amos Hale's legacy." Pierce scoffed, but the judge, a woman with steel-gray eyes, leaned forward, intrigued. Nora clicked her laptop, and Amos's voice filled the courtroom, frail but fierce. "This isn't what I signed, Vernon. I won't let them rewrite my legacy." A gasp rippled through the gallery. Penelope's smile froze, a crack in her armor. Pierce jumped up. "Objection. No provenance." Nora didn't flinch. "Then let's clarify with Exhibit B." Vernon Tate's voicemail played, his voice raw with panic. "Penelope, this is wrong. If Clarence finds out, we're done. This will's a fake." The room went still, the words a guillotine. Vernon, in the back row, sank lower, his face ashen. Nora pressed on, displaying the forged will's metadata, created when Amos was sedated, legally incapacitated. A spreadsheet followed, tracing Silver Point Ventures funds to Penelope's firm. Each transaction a nail in their coffin. The final blow was the email from Penelope's firm, offering Juniper $5,000 to reintegrate and sign away her rights. Nora read it aloud, her voice dripping with disdain. A bribe to silence a soldier who served her country. Penelope's hands gripped the table, her knuckles white. Gideon's jaw slackened, his bravado gone. Clarence's face twitched, a rare flicker of fear. Judge Harlan's gaze was ice, sweeping over the defendants. "This court finds credible evidence of fraud and conspiracy," she declared, her voice a hammer. "All Hale estate assets are frozen, pending a state investigation." The gavel fell, a sharp crack that echoed like a gunshot. Juniper didn't smile. She'd won the battle, but the war wasn't over. As she left the courtroom, a shadow lingered in the hall, watching. Someone wasn't done fighting, and neither was she. The Missoula courtroom's gavel still echoed in Captain Juniper Hale's ears, its sharp crack sealing a victory that exposed her family's fraud. Penelope's forged will, Gideon's cruelty, and Clarence's indifference had crumbled under the weight of evidence. Amos's defiant audio, Vernon's panicked voicemail, and Silver Point Ventures' dirty money trail. But as Juniper drove her grandfather's 1979 Chevy through Montana's snow-dusted roads, the triumph felt hollow. The shadow in the courtroom hall, watching, waiting, hinted that her family's empire wasn't done fighting. The USB and iPad data were weapons. But the war wasn't over. Then, her phone lit up with a single word. Mom. Loretta Hale, silent through years of betrayal, wanted to meet at the family's lakeside cabin in Flathead Lake. Juniper's heart tightened. This wasn't a truce, it was a final confrontation, a chance to uncover the last piece of Amos's truth. The lake's icy waves were calling, and so was a secret that could either break her or set her free. The cabin sat on Flathead Lake's shore, its cedar walls weathered by time, the water beyond a restless gray mirror. Juniper arrived at dusk, the sky bruised with purple and gold, her boots crunching on frosted gravel. Loretta stood on the porch, a fragile figure in a wool coat, her face etched with lines Juniper hadn't noticed before. They sat in creaking Adirondack chairs, a pitcher of iced tea sweating between them, untouched. The silence wasn't hostile like the lodges. It was heavy, laden with years of unspoken truths. Juniper waited, her ranger discipline keeping her steady, but her pulse thrummed. Loretta's hands trembled as she spoke, her voice a whisper against the lapping waves. "I knew, Juniper. I knew about Amos's real will. Vernon told me it was fair, that you'd get your share. But Penelope, she said it'd keep the peace." Juniper's breath caught, not from anger but from the raw ache of confirmation. "You believed her?" she asked, her voice soft, a question, not an accusation. Loretta's eyes stayed on the lake, avoiding her daughter's gaze. "I chose to," she admitted, a flicker of shame in her tone. "I was afraid of Clarence's rage. Afraid of losing what little held us together." The words hung like mist, fragile but heavy. Then Loretta's voice broke, recounting the night before Amos died. "He was barely conscious, but he grabbed my hand, said, 'Tell Juniper the Chevy's the key.' I buried it, too scared to speak." Juniper's heart lurched. The truck, the USB, it wasn't random. Amos had planned it, trusting her to find the truth. Loretta's confession wasn't enough to heal the years of silence, but it cracked something open in Juniper. A glimpse of her mother's fear, her weakness. "There's more," Loretta whispered, her eyes darting nervously to the darkening woods. "The Chevy's glove compartment. It's got a hidden lock, biometric, for your fingerprint. Amos had it built years ago." Juniper's mind raced. Another secret. Another piece of Amos's puzzle. She walked to the truck, parked under the pines, its rusted frame a silent sentinel. Her fingers found the glove compartment's latch, a faint sensor hidden in the seam. She pressed her thumb, and a soft click broke the silence. Inside, beneath a worn map of Montana, was a manila envelope, its edges yellowed but sealed. Her hands shook slightly, a rare crack in her armor, as she opened it. Inside was a letter, Amos's handwriting strong despite his frailty. "Juniper, my warrior," it began. "I knew you'd find this. Your honor is my legacy. Fight for it." Tucked behind was a passbook for a savings account, opened when she was born, hidden from her family's grasp. It wasn't a fortune, but it was proof. Amos's faith in her, untouched by Penelope's greed. As Juniper clutched the letter, a distant engine rumbled, headlights flickering through the trees. Loretta's eyes widened in fear. "They know you're here," she whispered. Someone, Gideon, maybe worse, was closing in. The envelope was a lifeline, but the fight was far from over. Juniper slipped it into her jacket, her resolve hardening. Amos's truth was in her hands, and no one would take it from her now. The Flathead Lake cabin faded in Captain Juniper Hale's rearview mirror, the manila envelope from the Chevy's hidden compartment a burning weight in her jacket. Her grandfather Amos's letter. "Your honor is my legacy. Fight for it." And the rediscovered savings account were his final gift, a testament to his belief in her. The distant headlights that had flickered through the pines as her mother confessed hinted at a threat still circling. Penelope and Gideon's empire wasn't done hunting her. But Juniper, forged in the crucible of ranger school and battlefields, wasn't running. The Missoula courtroom had cracked her family's facade, exposing their fraud through Amos's audio, Vernon's voicemail, and Silver Point Ventures' money trail. Now, with the original will restored, Juniper faced a choice. Claim her share of the Hale fortune or redefine her grandfather's legacy. As she drove through Montana's dawn, the Chevy's steady hum a reminder of Amos's trust. She knew this fight wasn't about money. It was about honor, and she was ready to make her final stand. Juniper sat in Nora Caldwell's cluttered office above the Missoula coffee shop, the air thick with the scent of roasted beans and victory. The court had reinstated Amos's original will, granting Juniper a third of the estate. Millions in land, stocks, and power. But as Nora spread the legal documents across the desk, Juniper's gaze drifted to the passbook from the Chevy, its modest sum a symbol of Amos's quiet faith. "I don't want it," she said, her voice steady, surprising even herself. Nora paused, pen hovering. "The money? Juniper, it's yours by right." Juniper shook her head, her mind clear as the Montana sky outside. It was never about the money. It was about proving them wrong, about Amos's truth. She leaned forward, her ranger resolve unshakable. "I want a new document drafted." Nora listened, her eyes widening as Juniper outlined her plan. Every cent of her inheritance, every dollar Penelope and Gideon had schemed to steal, would fund the General Amos Hale Valor Scholarship Fund, a foundation for children of disabled veterans and fallen soldiers. "It's what Amos would have wanted," Juniper said, her voice soft but ironclad. "A legacy of service, not greed." Nora's smile was fierce, a warrior recognizing another. "You're sure?" she asked, already typing. Juniper nodded, a weight lifting from her chest. "Justice isn't a check you cash. It's what you build." The passbook savings covered the Chevy's restoration, its engine now purring like a promise. The rest would seed a future for those who'd sacrificed everything. A monument to Amos's honor and Juniper's fight. As Nora filed the paperwork, Juniper felt a quiet peace settle in, the kind that comes after a long war. The courtroom had been her battlefield, but this act was her victory. The Burlington Gazette ran a discreet headline, "Hale Estate Fraud Exposed, Assets Frozen," and whispers of Penelope's bar investigation spread like wildfire. Gideon's desperate calls and Clarence's bitter summons at a coffee shop were echoes of a collapsing empire, but they no longer held power over her. Juniper had exposed their truth, and in doing so, found her own. She climbed into the Chevy, its leather seats now soft, the scent of Amos's pipe tobacco a faint memory. The road stretched ahead, winding through the Bitterroot's green valleys, bathed in morning light. She had no destination, only freedom. Freedom from her family's chains, from their lies. But as she drove, a shadow lingered in her mind. The headlights at the lake, the figure in the courtroom hall. Someone was still out there, watching. Penelope's ambition and Gideon's cruelty wouldn't fade quietly. Juniper's hand rested on the wheel, her knife still strapped to her ankle. The Valor Fund was her legacy, but the fight might not be over. For now though she drove, the Chevys hum a song of resilience. Amos's letter, tucked in her rucksack, was her compass. "Your honor is my legacy." She'd built something unbreakable, something no one could steal. The Montana sun rose over the Bitterroot Valley, painting the peaks gold as Captain Juniper Hale drove her restored 1979 Chevy Silverado down a quiet highway. The manila envelope, Amos's letter, and the Valor Fund were her anchors, proof that honor could outlast greed. She'd turned her family's betrayal into a beacon for others, a scholarship fund that would lift up the children of those who'd served. The road ahead was open, uncharted, and for the first time, Juniper felt truly free. Not just from Penelope, Gideon, and Clarence, but from the weight of their judgment. The Chevy's engine hummed, a steady reminder of Amos's faith, his voice whispering through the years, "Fight for it." She'd fought, and she'd won, not with anger, but with purpose. The distant threat, those headlights, that shadow, might still lurk, but Juniper was a ranger. She'd face it as she always had, with a steady hand and an unyielding heart. Her journey wasn't over, it was just beginning, a new mission to live the honor Amos saw in her. This story isn't just Juniper's, it's for anyone who's fought silent battles, who stood tall against those who tried to break them. Have you faced a moment where you had to choose between walking away or fighting for your truth? Share it below. Your voice matters. Like, comment, and subscribe to join our community of storytellers, where we honor the resilience that shapes us. Hit that share button to spread Juniper's tale, because stories like hers remind us. Honor is a fortress, and we're stronger together.